At my father's funeral, while his coffin was still being lowered into the ground, my stepmother leaned over and whispered the words that would seal her fate. "You don't deserve his love. You never did. And now that he's gone, you'll get exactly what you're worth, nothing." The cemetery was silent, except for the mechanical whir of the lowering device. Rain had started to fall, creating dark spots on the mahogany casket that held the only person who'd ever truly seen me. But Victoria's words cut through that silence like a blade through silk, sharp and deliberate and final. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I looked her straight in the eye and said something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "We'll see about that?" She had no idea that 3 months earlier I'd written a letter, not to her, not to the family, but to Dad's attorney. A letter that contained 7 years of documentation, 7 years of evidence, 7 years of truth that would turn her world upside down. She thought Dad's death meant she'd finally won. She had no idea the war was just beginning. My name is Sophia Chen, and this is the story of how my stepmother tried to erase me from my father's life, and how I used her own cruelty to destroy everything she thought she'd built. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 days after the funeral. Victoria had made sure to schedule it at the law offices of Morrison and Associates downtown, in one of those glass towers that made you feel small just walking in. She wanted the intimidation factor. She wanted me to feel out of place, unwelcome, undeserving. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing the only black dress I owned, a simple one I'd bought at Target 3 years ago for a job interview. Victoria swept in 10 minutes later in a designer suit that probably cost more than my rent, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Behind her came her twin daughters, Jessica and Jennifer, both 25, both dressed like they were attending a board meeting, rather than settling their stepfather's estate. "I'm surprised you came," Victoria said, not bothering to lower her voice in the elegant waiting room. "David always was too soft on you, filling your head with ideas about belonging." Jessica smirked. "Mom told us about your little scene at the cemetery. Pretty pathetic, even for you." Jennifer nodded in agreement. "Dad felt sorry for you, that's all. You were his charity case." The secretary, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, glanced up nervously from her desk. I could tell she'd witnessed scenes like this before, families tearing each other apart over money and inheritances. But this wasn't about money. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for 7 years. "Mrs. Chen, Mr. Morrison will see you all now," the secretary announced. We filed into the conference room like soldiers heading to battle. The lawyer, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, gestured for us to sit around a polished mahogany table. Victoria claimed the head of the table immediately, flanked by her daughters. I sat across from them, isolated but not alone. I had something they didn't know about. "Before we begin," Mr. Morrison said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express my condolences. David was a good man, and I know this is difficult for everyone." Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, performing grief like she'd rehearsed it. "Thank you, Harold. David would have wanted this to be quick and clean, no drama." Mr. Morrison nodded and opened a leather portfolio. David's will is straightforward in most respects. The house, the life insurance, the investment accounts, all go to Victoria, as is typical for a surviving spouse. I watched Victoria's face light up with satisfaction. She'd been counting on this moment for years, planning for it, orchestrating it. She thought she'd finally won. "However," Mr. Morrison continued, and that single word seemed to suck the air out of the room, "there are some additional items to address. David left specific instructions regarding Sophia." Victoria's smile faltered. "What kind of instructions?" "He established a trust fund for Sophia's education and future endeavors. It's substantial, $200,000, to be managed by the firm until Sophia turns 25. The twins gasped. Victoria's face went white, then red, then white again. "That's impossible. David would have told me. We discussed everything." "Apparently not everything," Mr. Morrison said gently. "The trust was established 6 months ago, but that's not all." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. My heart started pounding because I recognized my own handwriting on the front, to be opened only in the event of David Chen's death, in the presence of all family members. "What is that?" Victoria demanded. "A letter from Sophia to your late husband, delivered to our office 3 months ago with specific instructions. David never saw it. Sophia requested it only be opened after his passing, in front of the family." Victoria stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating the situation. David's barely cold in the ground, and she's already playing games." "Actually," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room, "I wrote this letter because I knew this day would come. I knew exactly what you'd try to do." Mr. Morrison looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Would you like me to read it, Sophia?" I nodded. Victoria sat back down, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. The twins leaned forward, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Dear Dad," Mr. Morrison began, and his voice carried the weight of every word I'd written in my tiny apartment 3 months ago, knowing this moment would come, preparing for the war. One knew Victoria would start the moment Dad couldn't protect me anymore. "Dear Dad, if this letter is being read, it means you're gone, and it means Victoria is about to show everyone who she really is. I'm writing this because I know that the moment you can't protect me anymore, she'll try to erase me from our family like I never existed. But I want you to know, and I want them to know, that I saw everything. I documented everything. And I never forgot a single moment of the 7 years she spent trying to make me disappear." Mr. Morrison paused, glancing around the room. Victoria's face had gone ashen. The twins exchanged worried looks. "I was 11 when you married Victoria. Do you remember what you told me that day? You said, 'Sophia, I know this is hard, but we're going to be a real family now. Victoria and the girls are going to love you just like I do.' I believed you, Dad. I wanted so badly to believe you." The lawyer's voice was steady, but I could see the impact the words were having. Even he seemed moved by what I'd written. "The first incident happened 2 weeks after the wedding. I was excited about my first day at Lincoln Middle School, and I'd laid out my new clothes the night before, that blue dress you bought me for the start of 7th grade. When I woke up, it was gone. Victoria said I must have misplaced it, that I was adjusting and probably confused. She gave me one of Jennifer's old sweaters instead, 3 sizes too big, with a stain on the sleeve. I found my dress later that day in the garage trash can, cut into pieces with scissors. When I told you, Victoria cried and said she was hurt that I would accuse her of something so cruel. She said maybe the family dog had gotten to it, though we both knew Rusty had never destroyed anything in his life. You believed her, Dad. You apologized to her for my accusation." Victoria shifted in her seat. "This is fabricated nonsense," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. That was the pattern that would define the next 7 years. Victoria would do something to hurt me, gaslight me when I reported it, and then play the victim when you got involved. She was brilliant at it, Dad. She never left marks. She never screamed. She was surgical in her cruelty. Mr. Morrison turned the page. The incidents escalated slowly. My school lunches would disappear from the refrigerator. Victoria would claim she threw them out because they looked spoiled, then express concern about my, quote, forgetfulness. My homework would vanish from my backpack. She'd suggest I was being, quote, irresponsible and needed better organizational skills. When I was 13, I saved up my allowance for 3 months to buy a camera for the school photography club. I hid it in my closet because I knew better than to leave anything valuable in plain sight. Victoria found it anyway. She said she was cleaning and accidentally knocked it off the shelf. The camera was destroyed, and she offered to replace it with a disposable one from the drugstore. You thought she was being generous. I watched the twins' faces as the letter continued. They were starting to look uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact. The psychological manipulation was constant. Victoria would wait until you were at work, then sit me down for talks about my place in the family. She'd explain that the blood family was different from add-ons like me. She'd say that while you felt obligated to care for me, real love was reserved for real family, meaning her and the twins. She was careful never to say these things in front of you, Dad. Instead, she'd plant seeds. She'd mention how mature Jessica and Jennifer were compared to some children. She'd worry out loud about kids who, quote, and adjust to blended families. She'd praise other people's children for being, quote, grateful and understanding their place. Mr. Morrison's voice grew quieter, more serious. By the time I was 15, I understood the game completely. Victoria wasn't just trying to make me feel unwelcome. She was systematically erasing my place in your heart. Every story she told about my problems at school, every concern she raised about my attitude, every suggestion that I needed tough love, was designed to make you see me as difficult, ungrateful, problematic. Victoria stood again, her hands shaking. Harold, this is enough. This girl is disturbed. She's creating elaborate fantasies. Please sit down, Victoria, Mr. Morrison said firmly. David's instructions were very clear. The entire letter must be read. The worst part wasn't the missing belongings or the subtle insults or even the constant gaslighting. The worst part was watching you change, Dad. Watching you start to believe her version of me. When I'd come to you excited about making an honor roll, you'd remind me that grades weren't everything. When I'd try to share good news, you'd warn me about getting a big head. When I'd ask for help with something, you'd suggest I needed to be more independent. Victoria convinced you that loving me too much would spoil me. She made you believe that being distant was being responsible. She turned your natural protective instincts into weapons against me, and I watched it happen day by day, knowing that fighting it would only prove her point about my attitude problem. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of Mr. Morrison turning pages. Victoria had sat back down, but her face was flushed with anger and something else. Fear. I stopped trying to tell you what was happening when I was 16. By then, Victoria had trained you so well that you'd automatically take her side in any conflict. She'd perfected the art of playing victim, and you'd perfected the art of believing her. I realized that the only way to survive until I turned 18 was to document everything and wait. So that's what I did, Dad. I waited, I watched, I wrote it all down. Every deleted text message, every quote, every conversation where Victoria reminded me that I was temporary while her daughters were permanent. I collected evidence like I was building a legal case, because I knew someday I'd need proof of what really happened in our house. Mr. Morrison looked up from the letter. Sophia, your father was very proud of you. He told me several times in the months before his death that you'd grown into a remarkable young woman. I think he knew more than you realized. Victoria's face had gone from white to red to purple. This is insane. Harold, you can't seriously believe this elaborate fantasy. Oh, but there's more, I said quietly. Tell them about the trust fund, Mr. Morrison. Tell them when Dad really established it. The lawyer nodded gravely. The trust wasn't established 6 months ago, as I mentioned earlier. It was established 3 years ago, and it's been growing with compound interest. David also left instructions for additional documentation to be reviewed today, documentation that Sophia provided to him before his death. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick folder. 3 months ago, I gave this to Dad. Copies of everything I'd collected over 7 years. Every recording, every photograph, every journal entry. I wanted him to know the truth before it was too late. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Victoria stared at the folder like it was a bomb. David never said anything, because he was a good man who hoped you might change. But he also was a smart man who prepared for the possibility that you wouldn't. And with that, I opened the folder that would change everything. 3 months before Dad died, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the scared 11-year-old girl who first walked into this family. I decided to stop being a victim and start being a strategist. Mr. Morrison continued reading from my letter as I pulled documentation from the folder I'd brought. I scheduled a meeting with Dad at his office, away from the house, away from Victoria's influence. I told him I had something important to share, something that couldn't wait. He probably expected a confession about grades or boys or college applications. He didn't expect me to walk in with 7 years of evidence. I watched Victoria's face as I spread photographs across the conference table. Pictures of my destroyed belongings, screenshots of deleted messages, printouts of my journals with dates and times meticulously recorded. I didn't ambush him with accusations, Dad. I simply presented the facts and let you draw your own conclusions. I showed you the pattern, the escalation, the systematic nature of what had been happening under your roof for 7 years. Jessica leaned forward to look at one of the photographs. My camera, smashed beyond repair, pieces scattered across my bedroom floor. I remember this, she whispered. Mom said Sophia dropped it down the stairs. Your mother said many things, I replied evenly. Most of them were lies designed to protect herself and manipulate your father. Mr. Morrison turned to a new section of the letter. Dad's reaction was everything I'd hoped for, and everything I'd feared. He was shocked, then angry, then heartbroken. He apologized over and over, saying he should have seen it, should have protected me better. But what impressed me most was that he didn't make excuses for Victoria, or try to minimize what she'd done. Instead, he asked me what I wanted to do with the information. Did I want him to confront Victoria? Did I want family counseling? Did I want him to ask her to leave? For the first time in years, Dad was putting my needs first, and it was both healing and heartbreaking. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. He never said anything to me, never asked me about any of this. That's because I asked him not to, I said simply. I had a different plan. Mr. Morrison continued reading. I told Dad that confronting Victoria would accomplish nothing. She'd deny everything, play the victim, and probably escalate her behavior out of desperation. Instead, I wanted to do something more strategic, more permanent. I asked Dad to set up the trust fund as a safeguard for my future, but to keep it secret from Victoria. I wanted her to believe she'd successfully driven me away, that she'd won completely. I wanted her to feel safe and confident in her victory. But I also asked Dad to document everything. Every conversation we had about Victoria's behavior, every piece of evidence I'd collected, every plan we made together. I wanted a paper trail that would outlast both of us. The twins were looking at each other with growing understanding. Jennifer spoke up for the first time. That's why you suddenly stopped fighting with Mom senior year. We thought you'd finally learned your place. I had learned my place, I said. Just not the place she thought she'd taught me. Mr. Morrison turned to another page. The most important part of my strategy was patience, Dad. I knew Victoria would reveal her true nature once she thought she'd won. I knew that without me there to blame for family dysfunction, her mask would slip. I knew that once she felt secure in her position, she'd stop pretending to be the loving stepmother. So I played my role perfectly. I became the withdrawn, defeated teenager Victoria wanted me to be. I stopped defending myself when she made cutting remarks. I stopped asking you for help with problems. I stopped trying to participate in family activities. I made myself invisible. But while I was playing victim, I was actually gaining power. I was working 2 part-time jobs and saving every penny. I was researching colleges and scholarship opportunities. I was building a support network of teachers and mentors who saw my potential. I was preparing for the day I could leave on my own terms, not because Victoria had driven me away. Victoria finally found her voice. You manipulated him. You turned David against his own wife with lies and fabrications. I showed him the truth, I interrupted. The truth you spent 7 years trying to hide. Mr. Morrison held up another document. Sophia also provided her father with this, a detailed timeline of Victoria's escalating behavior, cross-referenced with family events and financial records. I smiled grimly. Amazing what patterns emerge when you organize the data properly, like how Victoria's accidents with my belongings always seemed to coincide with times when Dad praised me or showed me special attention, or how her concerns about my behavior always intensified right before parent-teacher conferences or family gatherings where others might see how she treated me, or how the money Dad gave her for my school supplies and clothes somehow never quite made it to me, but Victoria's personal shopping trips increased around the same time. The twins exchanged another look. Jessica's voice was small when she spoke. Mom, the money thing? Is that true?" Victoria's silence was enough. Mr. Morrison continued with my letter. The hardest part of the strategy was watching Dad struggle with the knowledge of what had been happening. He wanted justice for me, but he also loved Victoria, or thought he did. He was torn between protecting me and maintaining his marriage. "That's when I made the most difficult decision of my life, Dad. I told you I was planning to move away for college, far enough that I wouldn't be a constant reminder of the problems in your marriage. I released you from the burden of choosing between Victoria and me. But I also made you promise that if anything happened to you, if Victoria showed her true colors after your death, you'd make sure the truth came out. You'd make sure she couldn't rewrite history or claim she'd been the loving stepmother who tried her best with a difficult child." I looked directly at Victoria. Dad promised he'd protect me even after death. This letter, this documentation, this moment right now, it's all his final gift to me. Victoria stood up so abruptly her chair toppled backward. "I won't listen to any more of this. Harold, I'm David's widow. I inherited everything. Whatever games this girl is playing." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said calmly, "there's one more document David left. Sophia, would you like to explain?" I pulled out the final piece of paper from my folder. 3 weeks before Dad died, he had you sign what you thought was paperwork for refinancing the house. Do you remember, Victoria? Her face went ashen. "What are you talking about?" "You were so eager to get your hands on Dad's assets that you didn't read the fine print. What you actually signed was a confession. A document acknowledging that you'd systematically mistreated me and that Dad's decision to protect me financially was justified." "And Iraq, Lord Huff." Mr. Morrison nodded. David was very thorough. The document Victoria signed includes an admission that Sophia's accusations were accurate and that any challenge to David's will would constitute perjury. The silence in the room was absolute. Victoria's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and everyone could see it happening in real time. "You see," I said quietly, "I didn't just document the abuse. I documented the cover-up. I documented the lies. I documented everything that would be needed to prove the truth if anyone ever tried to deny it. And now that truth is part of the legal record, signed by your own hand." Mr. Morrison set down my letter and picked up another document. "There's more to David's will that we haven't discussed yet. Sophia, your father left very specific instructions about how his estate should be handled if Victoria ever challenged your inheritance or made false claims about your relationship with him." Victoria, who had been standing frozen since learning about the document she'd unknowingly signed, slowly sank back into her chair. "What kind of instructions?" "Let me read from David's personal addendum to the will," Mr. Morrison said, adjusting his glasses. "If Victoria Chen attempts to contest Sophia's inheritance, makes public statements disparaging Sophia's character, or claims that Sophia was anything other than a beloved daughter who was systematically mistreated by my second wife, then the following provisions go into effect immediately." I watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions: confusion, fear, anger, and finally, a dawning horror, as she realized how completely she'd been outmaneuvered. First, the house at 42 Maple Street, currently bequeathed to Victoria, will be sold immediately, with all proceeds going to establish a scholarship fund in Sophia's mother Rebecca's name. Victoria will have 30 days to vacate the premises. Jessica gasped. "Mom, that's our home." Second, Mr. Morrison continued, the life insurance policy, currently valued at $500,000 and designated to Victoria, will be redirected to Sophia's trust fund. Victoria will receive the minimum amount required by law, $1. Jennifer stood up, her face pale. "This can't be legal. You can't just change a will after someone dies." "Actually," I said calmly, "this isn't changing the will. This is executing the will exactly as Dad wrote it. He anticipated Victoria's behavior and planned accordingly." Mr. Morrison nodded. David was very thorough. He included provisions for multiple scenarios, all legally sound and properly witnessed. "Sophia, would you like to explain how this came about?" I opened another section of my folder. After I showed Dad the evidence of Victoria's treatment, we spent weeks planning together. Dad realized that Victoria's behavior would likely escalate after his death, especially once she discovered I wasn't as powerless as she'd assumed. So he created what he called insurance policies, legal mechanisms that would activate if Victoria proved she hadn't changed, if she continued her pattern of manipulation and cruelty, even after his death. Victoria found her voice, though it was shaky. David wouldn't do this. He loved me. He wouldn't leave me with nothing. He didn't leave you with nothing, I replied. He left you with exactly what you deserve based on how you treated his daughter. The same daughter you told at his funeral that she didn't deserve his love. Mr. Morrison pulled out yet another document. Sophia, your father also asked me to share this if Victoria's behavior at the funeral was consistent with the pattern you'd documented. I believe her words to you at the graveside qualify. He began reading from a handwritten note in Dad's familiar scrawl. If Victoria proves at my funeral that she learned nothing from our conversations, if she continues to treat Sophia with cruelty and disrespect even in death, then she has forfeited any right to benefit from my life's work. Sophia is my daughter in every way that matters. She has shown more grace, intelligence, and strength in 18 years than Victoria has shown in our entire marriage. If Victoria cannot see Sophia's worth, cannot treat her with basic human decency even at my funeral, then Victoria does not deserve the comfort and security my estate would provide. The twins were staring at their mother with expressions I'd never seen before. 7 years of watching Victoria manipulate situations and gaslight me had apparently shielded them from seeing her true nature. But now, with the evidence laid out and their stepfather's words echoing in the room, they couldn't deny what they were witnessing. "Mom," Jessica said quietly, "what did you say to Sophia at the funeral?" Victoria's silence stretched on until Jennifer pressed, "Mom, what did you say?" Finally, Victoria's facade cracked completely. I told her the truth. That David felt sorry for her, that she didn't deserve his love, that she'd finally get what she was worth, nothing. The twins recoiled as if they'd been slapped. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God, Mom, how could you say that? At Dad's funeral?" "He wasn't your father," Victoria snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. "He was David to you, and he was a good stepfather. But Sophia, she was always in the way. Always taking his attention, his money, his energy that should have gone to our real family. And there it was. 7 years of manipulation and gaslighting summed up in one moment of brutal honesty. Victoria had finally revealed exactly who she was, exactly what she'd been doing, exactly why she'd spent 7 years trying to drive a grieving child away from the only parent she had left. Mr. Morrison made a note on his legal pad. "Victoria, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded for legal purposes, as specified in David's will. Your statements here today will become part of the official record." Victoria's face went white. "You can't, that's not." "Actually, it's completely legal," I said. "Illinois is a one-party consent state, remember? And since I'm a party to this conversation, I don't need anyone else's permission to record it." I pulled out my phone, showing the recording app that had been running since we entered the room. Amazing what you can learn from your father's legal textbooks. Dad taught me to always document everything, to always be prepared. Jennifer sank into her chair, staring at her mother like she was seeing a stranger. "Mom, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Sophia never did anything to you." "She existed," Victoria said bitterly. "She reminded David every day of Rebecca, of his perfect first wife, of the life he had before me. I could never compete with a dead woman's memory, so I tried to remove the reminder. The honesty was breathtaking in its cruelty. 7 years of psychological warfare reduced to its essence. Victoria had tortured a child because she was jealous of a dead woman." Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Victoria, given your statements today, David's contingency provisions are now in effect. You have 30 days to vacate the house. The life insurance proceeds will be redirected to Sophia's trust. And there's one more thing." He pulled out a final document. David also left instructions for what he called the nuclear option, a complete accounting of every financial manipulation, every lie, every act of cruelty Victoria committed during their marriage. This document will be filed with the court and become public record if Victoria ever attempts to contest these arrangements or make false claims about Sophia publicly. I smiled for the first time in days. Dad really did think of everything. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. Victoria stood up, her composure completely shattered. This is insane. You've all lost your minds. David was manipulated by a spoiled brat who couldn't accept that she wasn't the center of the universe anymore. Stop. Jessica's voice cut through her mother's rant like a blade. Just stop, Mom. We heard what you said. We see the evidence. We know what you did. Jennifer nodded, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to a kid? How could you be so cruel to someone who'd already lost her mother? Victoria looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, someone who would validate her version of reality. But the truth was overwhelming, documented, recorded, and legally binding. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'll fight this. I'll contest everything. Mr. Morrison shook his head sadly. Victoria, I strongly advise against that course of action. You've already provided a recorded confession of your behavior. Contesting the will would only trigger additional penalties and make everything public. David was very thorough in protecting Sophia's interests. I stood up, gathering my documents. Victoria, for 7 years you told me I didn't belong in this family. You were right. I don't belong in your family. But this was never your family to begin with. It was Dad's family, and he chose to protect the daughter you tried to destroy. The twins were holding each other, crying softly. I felt a moment of sympathy for them. They'd been used as weapons against me without fully understanding what their mother was doing. Jessica, Jennifer, I said gently, you're welcome to stay in touch if you want. This doesn't have to be the end of our relationship. You're not responsible for your mother's choices. Jessica looked up through her tears. Sophia, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. Victoria was very good at hiding her true nature. But now you do know. And what you do with that knowledge is up to you. As we prepared to leave the conference room, Mr. Morrison handed me a final envelope. Sophia, your father left this for you to read privately. He said it would explain everything he couldn't say while he was alive. I took the envelope with hands that only trembled slightly. After 7 years of battle, victory felt strangely hollow. I hadn't wanted to destroy Victoria. I just wanted her to stop destroying me. Victoria made one last attempt at control. Sophia, if you think this makes you family, you're wrong. Blood is thicker than water and you'll never. Actually, I interrupted, the full quote is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that chosen family, bonds forged through loyalty and love, are stronger than biological relationships. Dad chose me, Victoria. Every day for 7 years, despite your best efforts to turn him against me, he chose me. And in the end, that's what mattered. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, my future secure, and my father's love finally publicly, legally acknowledged. Victoria had tried to erase me from our family, but instead she'd erased herself. 6 months after the reading of the will, I'm sitting in my new apartment near Northwestern University, where I'm studying pre-med with Dad's trust fund covering every expense. The apartment is small but bright, with big windows that let in morning sunlight and a kitchen where I can cook meals without anyone timing me or criticizing my choices. The envelope Mr. Morrison gave me that day still sits on my desk, read and reread dozens of times. Dad's final letter to me was everything I'd hoped for and everything I'd needed to hear. My dearest Sophia, he'd written, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and Victoria has shown you exactly who she is. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better while I was alive. I'm sorry I let her convince me, even temporarily, that you were anything other than the greatest gift your mother ever gave me. I want you to know that I saw through Victoria's manipulation long before you brought me your evidence. I saw how she treated you when she thought I wasn't watching. I saw how she tried to diminish you, to make you smaller, to convince you that you didn't deserve love or respect or a place in our family. But I also saw something Victoria never understood. I saw your strength. I saw how you endured her cruelty without becoming cruel yourself. I saw how you protected yourself without lashing out. I saw how you grew into a remarkable young woman despite every obstacle she put in your path. The trust fund isn't just money, Sophia. It's proof that I always believed in you, always knew you'd achieve great things, always wanted to ensure you had every opportunity to build the life you deserve. Victoria tried to convince me you were temporary, but you're permanent. You're my daughter, my legacy, my pride. I hope someday you can forgive an old man for not being braver, for not confronting Victoria sooner, for letting you fight alone for so long. I hope you understand that every legal protection I put in place, every contingency I planned, was my way of fighting for you when I couldn't be there anymore. The letter was signed simply, "Love always, Dad," but attached to it was something even more precious, a copy of the will amendment he'd written the day after I showed him my evidence. Let it be known that Sophia Chen is my daughter in every sense that matters. She has shown more grace, strength, and wisdom than anyone should have to develop so young. Any provision in this will that protects her interests reflects not charity or obligation, but recognition of her worth and my love for her. If anyone questions whether Sophia deserved my protection and support, let them consider this. She survived 7 years of systematic psychological abuse and emerged stronger, kinder, and more determined than her abuser. She documented injustice with the precision of a lawyer and endured pain with the dignity of a saint. Sophia Chen is the best person I know, and I am proud to be her father. I keep that letter in a frame next to my bed, next to a photo of Dad and me from my high school graduation, one of the few pictures where Victoria isn't lurking in the background, managing the narrative. The twins have reached out several times since the will reading. Jessica apologized in a long, heartfelt email, admitting that she'd always known something was wrong but had been afraid to confront their mother. Jennifer called to tell me they'd moved out of Victoria's house and were staying with her Aunt Margaret while they figured out their next steps. "We're going to therapy," Jennifer told me. "We're trying to understand how we missed so much, how we let Mom manipulate us into thinking her behavior was normal." I told them what I'd learned over the years, that Victoria was an expert manipulator who'd spent decades perfecting her craft. They weren't weak or stupid for falling for it. They were children who trusted their mother to tell them the truth about their family. Victoria herself has disappeared from our lives completely. The house sold quickly. Apparently the neighborhood had always admired it, never knowing what kind of dysfunction it contained. I heard through Jessica that Victoria moved to Arizona to live with a cousin, though she tells people there that her ungrateful stepdaughter stole her inheritance through lies and manipulation. Even in exile, she can't admit the truth about what she did. But I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires energy I'd rather spend on building my future. I'm studying to become a pediatric psychiatrist, specializing in helping children who've experienced family trauma. I want to be the advocate I needed when I was 11 years old and afraid. My professors are impressed with my research on psychological manipulation and family dynamics. They don't know it comes from personal experience, and I don't tell them. I let my work speak for itself, just like I always have. Some evenings, when I'm studying late in my apartment, I think about the girl I used to be, the one who believed that if she just worked harder, stayed quieter, made herself smaller, she might earn her place in the family. That girl couldn't have imagined this life, this freedom, this security. But she survived long enough to become me, and that's the only revenge I'll ever need. Last week, I received a letter from a girl named Sarah Peterson, a 16-year-old who found my story online after Jessica posted about it on social media. Sarah is living with a stepfather who demeans her, and a mother who won't protect her. She asked if I had any advice for documenting what was happening to her. I wrote back immediately, enclosing copies of the journal templates I'd used, and detailed instructions for gathering evidence safely. I told her what I wish someone had told me at 16, that surviving isn't enough, that she deserves to thrive, and that sometimes the best revenge is living so well that your abusers become irrelevant. "Document everything," I wrote to Sarah, "not because you're planning revenge, but because you're building proof of your own worth. Every lie they tell about you, every cruel thing they do, every moment they try to make you feel small, write it down. Because someday, when you're free and strong and successful, you'll need that evidence to remind yourself how far you've come. And remember, they're not trying to break you because you're weak. They're trying to break you because they see your strength and it terrifies them. Your survival is their defeat. I signed the letter with love and solidarity, Sophia Chen, and included my phone number. Sarah isn't alone anymore, and neither am I. Tomorrow, I start my clinical rotations at the Children's Hospital. I'll be working with kids who've experienced trauma, helping them understand that their past doesn't define their future. I'll be the voice that tells them they're worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth love. Victoria tried to teach me that I was disposable, temporary, unworthy of the space I occupied. Instead, she taught me that I was strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to outmaneuver anyone, and valuable enough to fight for. She tried to erase me from Dad's family, but she only succeeded in erasing herself. She thought the absence of love in her heart made her powerful, but it only made her empty. I kept warm, I kept the love, I kept everything that mattered. And now, 6 months later, sitting in my bright apartment with my father's letter beside me and my future spread out ahead of me, I finally understand what true victory looks like. It's not the moment your enemy falls, it's the moment you realize you've risen so far above them that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. Victoria spent 7 years trying to convince me I didn't deserve love, but Dad's letter, the trust fund, the legal protections he put in place, they're all proof that love won. Love for me, belief in me, faith in my future. She lost the only war that ever mattered, the war for my father's heart, and in losing that war, she lost everything else too. I don't think about Victoria much anymore. When I do, it's with something approaching pity. She wasted 7 years of her life trying to destroy a child who grew up to be stronger than she ever was. She sacrificed her relationship with her own daughters to pursue a vendetta against someone who never threatened her. She could have been a loving stepmother. She could have embraced the chance to be part of a larger family. She could have chosen kindness over control, love over fear. Instead, she chose cruelty. And in the end, cruelty consumed her. But I chose differently. I chose to document instead of destroy, to build instead of burn, to survive instead of surrender. I chose to be my father's daughter, strategic, patient, loving, and ultimately victorious. Victoria thought she was teaching me my place in the family. She was right. My place was at the center of my father's heart, protected by his love, secured by his will, and unshakable by anything she could do to me. She never stood a chance. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.